Now, what do you think when you hear the word Coventry? That it contains 3 separate cathedrals, that it's home to this, one of the most impressive medieval guild halls anywhere in the United Kingdom, that it was once the 4th largest and richest city in Britain, that it's now home to one of the most popular 20th century buildings visited anywhere in the UK, or indeed that it contains the largest and tallest medieval parish church anywhere in the country. It's quite a list, but I suspect that most of that is a surprise to many of you.
This old city at the centre of England has a great depth of history, but it's overlooked, underestimated, and some of its glories are hidden. And a few of them are now starting to need some serious attention. That's why World Monuments Fund is working to protect one of Coventry's most historic buildings, St Michael's Cathedral, and to conserve and display its overlooked treasures because they're nationally important. It's part of a campaign that is changing the face of Coventry.
Now let's be honest, Coventry is a city with an image problem. Its impenetrable ring road and confusing one-way system is enough to put many people off venturing into its heart. And that's the problem. Neighbouring Stratford and Warwick tend to soak up the tourist cash, but if you let all of this put you off a visit to the heart of this city, believe you me, you are missing an historic treat.
Buildings like the remains of the first cathedral, built on the site of a priory founded by Coventry's most famous citizen, Lady Godiva, and her husband, Earl Leofric. It was the only cathedral to have been pulled down by Henry VIII.
So, lots of ruins, and if you are familiar with any part of this city's history, you might reasonably ask, well, what's left to see of its historic heart when, as most of us know, it was flattened during the Blitz of 1940. On the night of the 14th of November, the Luftwaffe launched a raid infamously known as Operation Moonlight Sonata, and it effectively tore the heart out of this once proud and historic centre.
The destruction took the lives of 600 people. The news films still hold the power to shock, with pitiful footage of smouldering and collapsed streets. You'd think it had all gone.
Coventry today is a city of over 300,000 people, with a vibrant university catering for students from all over the world. And it sits next to this, the striking form of the Herbert Gallery. The modern Herbert Gallery sits right next door to the ruins of St Michael's Cathedral behind me. And the really nice thing is that the medieval tracery in that surviving window is picked out here in the atrium with this ambitious grid shell roof. A real testament not only to Coventry's past, but also to its future.
The development of buildings like ours and like the Coventry Transport Museum, telling the stories of the past but in a rather more modern fashion and with the sort of facilities that people expect, is starting to make it easier. So for 1 million+ visitors it's working. There's just many more people out there that we want to reach over the next few years.
Coventry's reputation was blighted after the bombs fell, when town planners got to work replacing the rubble with an experimental city plan that is itself being replaced. The experiment didn't entirely work, but the destruction and replacement of historic Coventry wasn't all after 1940. The story is more complex than meets the eye. Major damage to the medieval city was wrought before the war by an overestimation of the reasonable price of progress. Coventry, in common with many cities, was intent on modernising. Outmoded notions of progress are easy to scoff at in retrospect, but when the opportunities of horseless transport for all beckoned, whilst smallpox and polio still threatened, trading alleyways and open drains for boulevards and clean services may be understandable. This is, after all, what the Victorians had been working towards for decades.
By the mid to late 19th century, the enormous amounts of wealth being generated in industrial centres like Coventry began to be reflected in its civic architecture. Take the town hall behind me. It's a wonderful, romantic, poetic, if you will, statement about the city's place, not just in terms of the rest of the country, but also the world. This was a building built to last, but by the mid-20th century, well, all that had changed. These buildings were replaced by bland utilitarian structures that were in some ways a manifesto for efficiency.
In 1937, the new Corporation Street and Trinity Street were completed, replacing acres of Coventry's most historic and atmospheric lanes. The Bullring, Butcher Row, Ironmonger Row, St Agnes Street and the Spicer Stoke were swept away. 3 years before the Luftwaffe's murderously indiscriminate bombardment, the jewel of the Midlands had already been shattered to make way for the cars that were manufactured here. It was this engineering capacity itself which attracted the attention of the Luftwaffe.
St Michael's ruins are extremely important because they're very evocative for people who have suffered from war, particularly the population of Coventry, but also the thousands who come and visit our ruins every year. It reminds them of their own suffering.
In the post-war age of progress, there was little appreciation of the need to preserve the precious survivals of old Coventry. The Coventry Standard explained that many of the old landmarks have disappeared or are scheduled to disappear, and the size of such historians as we still have within the city are so faint that they're not heard.
Now, it's hard to credit, but there were even plans to tear down this wonderful old building. It's been here since 1509. It's known locally as Ford's Hospital. It was an almshouse for women. Most cities would shout about it, but here in Coventry, you just kind of discover it.
This is another of those old landmarks, St Mary's Guildhall, and it's on Bailey Lane, right by St Michael's Cathedral.
Now, the church of St Michael's was largely built and paid for by the merchants who dominated this city, as indeed was this extraordinary building. This is the Guildhall, and it was home to their own guild, the Trinity Guild. Now, the smart thing about the merchants is that they also picked the mayors from their own numbers, so this was very much the seat of power back in the day, but in some respects, well, it still is. The modern town hall is just next door.
This great hall was begun in around 1390. Its north window dates to 30 years or so later, and it shows the young Henry VI who held Parliament here surrounded by the conquerors of history. The Emperor Constantine, Richard the Lionheart, Edward III, his own father Henry V, and the romantic figure of King Arthur. The glass is a manifesto for the power of the Lancastrian claim, one which would, in that same reign, be overturned in the turmoil of the Wars of the Roses.
What's remarkable about the glass behind me is that it was saved, preserved during the ravages of war, and it survives to tell us an important story. It's a tale of the Lancastrian dynasty. It tells us not just about the kings themselves, but also gives us important clues as to how they wanted to be seen by their peers, and thankfully, now us. And more importantly still perhaps, it was made by John Thornton, a man whose legacy in terms of the architecture of this country goes before him.
I heard a rumour that there were crates of fabulous medieval glass here in the basement at the new cathedral in Coventry, much of it obviously dating to the 15th century. And when I came out and had a look at it, it was pretty clear that it was a special collection. He was clearly one of the most prolific and probably successful glaziers in late medieval England.
But where do we display that wonderful glass? Clearly it needs somewhere pretty special, but let's face it, it's hard to see how the ruins in their current form could really accommodate them. But there is a solution hidden beneath my feet, and also the promise of quite a secret. The cathedral here had 3 crypts. There's one next door. This is crypt number 2. Look at that extraordinary ceiling. About 1320 this was built. Now, after the destruction of the building above me, this became a makeshift chapel in its own right. It's now known as the Wiley Chapel. This little altar was set up during the war. But through here, well, goodness knows what we might find. This is crypt number 3. It's full of rubble and debris dating from the Blitz. You can probably just see a bit of broken tracery window in there. Just imagine what kind of clues to the past may be contained amongst the debris. Clues to the past that could help us give this place a real future. So why has the World Monument Fund come to Coventry? Well, it's not just about celebrating this city's rich history, nor indeed indulging in any misplaced sentimentality and nostalgia about the tragedy of the war. It's about looking at an historic city that's grown from the landscape around it, looking at the craftsmanship that's gone into some of these wonderful buildings. These are important lessons that we do have to remember. And those were lessons that weren't lost on the mind of Sir Basil Spence, the architect who redesigned this building after the war. And when finally the new cathedral opened its doors back in 1962, it was a testament to his vision and his appreciation of the craft that goes in to a medieval building in many ways. He commissioned all of the details before he'd finalised his plans for the structure itself. I think he was a pioneer.
Coventry's stained glass is born again in more vivid colours. The tapestry, which has hung for 500 years beneath the northern window of St Mary's Hall, finds a superlative modern equivalent in the terminating north wall of this cathedral. Gothic vaults are here become a light canopy, slim concrete resting so lightly it might fly. Spence knew that no medium of human expression once invented has ever died out. Crafting from natural materials is part of what it is to be human. And respect for 600-year-old craftsmanship is a large part of the reason why Coventry is World Monuments Fund's new major partnership. Everyone we bring here enjoys the beauty and feels the value of this fragile inheritance, this powerful witness to the endeavours of our forefathers and the plight of those less fortunate, including those who knew war. But the church is a big institution. Why can't the cathedral find £2 million from savings?
As the Dean and Chapter, we have a particular challenge because we have two cathedrals to look after. The new one, which was built and opened in 1962, which absorbs a lot of resources to keep it going and absorbed any money that there was in any sort of endowment at Coventry Cathedral. And then we have to keep the ruins standing, and we have just really run out of resources to do so.
Well, who would have thought it? Coventry! Underneath all the post-war redevelopment, there is, as you can see, a gem of a medieval city just waiting to be rediscovered, but it needs an awful lot of help. It needs a genuine galvanising force to help draw it all together. And that's where you and the World Monuments Fund really come in. Because to us, these aren't just ruins, these are precious and invaluable assets that deserve a future. And together, we can help give them one.